number 6, which was the 360 education video. Team 3, which is educational technologies. Team 2 was neuro rehabilitation. Team 9 was augmented reality. And Team 14 is the robotics, which was the snitch, right? So that was so far, those are the top 6 that have come out of that analysis that we talked about, okay? Any questions? Yeah. Congratulations to those 6 teams.
Okay, and we also decided to make slight changes for the second half of the day. So the first one is going to be seminar with Jen and Andreas, and Jen is going to leave in 2 hours. And then instead of like spending extra time with selected 6 teams, we decided to do it a little bit differently and include everyone. And Andreas is going to explain how we're going to do it.
I'll explain it to you. So the 6 teams on the next presentation, just to sort of make this clear, we're going to have online presentation, right? And every team is going to get feedback in a similar way that we have done, yesterday, okay? And those 6 teams, we're going to spend some more time of going into very specific details at that point, okay? So that's what we sort of like predict that, those teams might be at that point where we can sort of give, a very specific push at that point and spend, but that takes a little bit more time that we spend online. Now for the second half of the day, what I kind of want to do is I looked at 3 teams which I would like to use as an example, or specific aspects of an example, because what I really want to cover is, and this is going to be sort of live, I have to like think on the spot here, I don't have, is to show you some like research methods, okay, that you may not be familiar with, right? So, and these are specifically, so as Jean said, right, the educational part is really, center of everything, right? So everybody should be able to take away certain things. So we're going to do it with Team 12, that's the meta materials, Team 2, the neurorehabilitation, and the educational technology, Team 3. So specific aspects that I would like to go into and show you at these examples of how we would say that, ask the next set of questions, but it's really applicable to everybody, right? And like how to look at certain resources, like what the FDA can tell you, what scientific journals, how to search for this in an efficient way, how to extract information from regulatory bodies, from material science, how to reformulate the question, and have a live session at this. But it's actually applicable to anybody because it's just a matter of different questions, different resources. Okay.
So did you guys get that? That's really, so
is that
he's delving into these 3 teams because they're good for the educational perspective, but everybody can be observing as he's doing that this afternoon.
Yeah. So basically, become like part of the team. I come, for a time, I become part of the team and say, okay, all right, we'll work, through this live, and I'll, I think I have internet access, so I log into the, through the MIT network, into the library system, and so on and so forth, and show you basically how one could, on the spot, live, if you like, how I would think about it, and redirect those questions and find that out. Okay.
Any questions?
Вы еще не проснулись, вы такие молчаливые. I was just asking maybe they still half asleep. Вообще никаких вопросов ни у кого нет, все в порядке? Все понятно?
All right. So for the next hour and a half or so, we wanted to cover a little bit of a more formal lecture, but we want this to be interactive. So I'm going to ask you guys to participate, and Yelena's going to help me if you guys aren't responsive.
So you better participate.
So we thought about what would be good to talk about today, and you guys have all nicely started to really understand how to work the early stage of the innovation process. But you know, the sort of classroom is always a simulation of the real thing, right? Because these innovation processes occur over years, right? If you're doing a real innovation, is to keep on going. Actually, if you're really on a very fundamental innovation, it could go on forever, right? You just keep on coming up with new innovation paths, okay? So I was thinking that maybe one interesting thing to cover this morning was to give you insight into something we do mention on the online lectures, which is our experience with this company we created called the Water Initiative, because it's a really good example of how, and we mentioned this to some groups, it's a really good example about how you can go down an innovation path and you make one product, right? And that product you can see is going to have a certain lifetime, but then you can go backwards in the innovation process because you already developed those universes, and then you can go down another path and release another product, right? And then we did it again, stepped back again, and yet released another product, right? So I thought that would be instructive. That's what we call it, multiple iterations, right? So I thought that'd be instructive because you can't really do that yourself in this sort of, you know, classroom setting that we're doing for this class, right? This kind of brief time we have together. So I wanted to give you a little bit insight in a real company, how you can use this process to keep on releasing new products, okay? So that's the first part. That may take, you know, quite a bit of time because professors like to talk. So, however, I also have more material in the second part related to the other example that is partially covered online in the book, which is the semiconductor example, the strained silicon, and that was my first company, Amber Wave Systems Corporation. And that one, we wanted to spend a little time on this idea, and I'll mention it here too, of transactional experiences, which are the thing that really allows you to decrease uncertainty, okay? And that, since that one occurred over 20 years, we have many, many examples about how the path that we were on kept on being modified by information that we couldn't get, you know, at the beginning, right? So that shows the dynamic process of innovation, that there's always things being added in the universes by information you get when you're actually out there innovating. And also there's other companies and people doing things that influence your process. And you can see how those things can come in, and that can change your path, okay? So that's the second part. You know, I mean, there's like 4 hours of material in here, so we won't get through it all. But, and also if you have any questions, I want to have this be dynamic, right? I don't know what the normal thing is for lectures in Russia, but you know, with the online stuff, what we're doing at MIT today, what I do is I put all my lectures online, just like you guys have, and then we use classroom time for pretty much discussion. So if you guys have any feedback, someone else is probably thinking of the same question, so we'll stop and discuss anything that you want to focus on. Okay? All right, so in case any of you, I'm trying to remember where you are in the lectures. Did they cover it? Yeah, so TWI is the Water Initiative, and so the company in itself, the reason I like this example is it's also a seemingly simple idea. You know, the semiconductor thing is good, but to be honest, you have to get into a little bit of solid-state physics and stuff like that, and there's details in there in the technology and choices that, you know, you can kind of cover that, but this one's very simple. I think everybody can understand water purification. It's very important, and it's now, there's lots of markets globally, and so people get excited And there, you know, we formed this company in 2007. And I wanted to tell you, remember this, the idea is both to talk about these iterations, but also talk about how the process works. And there we have some nice little marketing information. Now, remember I said the company started in 2007, so how did that happen? You guys might remember in 2007, there was all this excitement about nano. Do you guys remember that? Nano this, nano that, right? It turns out, by the way, I already knew when this started to happen that, of course, you know, technically you could look at a lot of water purification technologies, and they're already all nano, right? Because they operate on high surface to volume ratios. They often operate on things that are, you know, the purification materials can be very small, you know, broken up into small little quantities that are on a nano scale. So, you know, technically it was already nano anyway, right? But that's not how the company got started. There was a person who was pretty much a financial person in New York, and he was a graduate of Cornell University, where I got my PhD degree. And so we met at Cornell, actually. He was on the trustees, and he had this big idea. You know, this is how a lot of things start, right? Water's going to be the next oil, right? And so, I'm like, all right, you know, of course, I already know about the innovation process at this point. So the cool thing about this company is its progress is completely related to executing on the process that we talked about. But it doesn't mean that people understand what I'm talking about. So when this guy comes to me from New York, I don't sit there and say, hey, we have to populate the universes, you know, like whatever. You know, he's not going to understand what I'm talking about, right? So I'm just hearing all this excitement, oil, water's next oil. And so I said, okay, you know, let's talk, let's start to develop the idea. And so besides water is the next oil, the second thing he said, nanotechnology is going to change water. I said, okay, all right, you know. So that's why I draw the purple, our little technology thing. The idea at that time, the excitement was, there's all this nano stuff happening. So it's going to change all of these markets. It's all about the technology. We're going to have new technology, right? So of course, there's another part of this that you may have heard of, is that when people look at this opportunity, you do what you would do in class, right? Like we're teaching you. You kind of go and get broad market information, right? And it turns out that, of course, because of the internet, everybody in this field gets the same broad information, right? So I'm telling you this because remember how we say you have to kind of always go one level deeper than just, the internet's good for the first pass in the iteration, but you got to really dig deeper, right? I can tell you for a fact in this field, so many companies, all you hear about, as long as they've raised capital, is the same internet information, which is here, right? It's like, there's water scarcity and there's a water purity problem. They show the graphs on the right and about how there's all this problem worldwide for water. It's all very interesting, right? But you can't fill out your universes and go further without getting a lot more detail, right? This just says, yeah, you know, water's important, right? So people that raise money and they operate on this, they're just doing random things, right? Because they're not doing what you guys have done in this class, right? So we got to get beyond this, and that's why this left-hand part is the first thing we did. We started getting more resolution on what this really means, right? Now this is going to sound funny because you're all very smart people, right? I mean, it's not smart, it's more like you're kind of thinking about these things. But it took me an enormous amount of time with the initial team, because there's like 7 of us that started this thing, to get the idea that water scarcity is different from purity of water. And some of you might have heard yesterday, Andreas did it a couple times with some of the teams. Remember, there's this market thing, but you have to delve into the details of what that market actually means, right? Remember, Andreas, there's a couple teams trying to get you guys to look deeper, past the initial, yes, we know there's some market there, right? And this is an example of that because, okay, there's a market there, but there's very different markets in the sense of scarcity versus purity, okay? So for a long time, I especially the guy from New York, I had a hard time getting him to understand we're not going to solve, I'll get into what technology area we're looking at in a second, but we're not going to solve the scarcity of water issue, right? So the idea, what we were working on was never going to make more water, right? What we were going to be able to do is that whatever water was around, we were going to be able to guarantee that it was pure, and we're going to do that efficiently at the point of use where people actually use it, right? That's important because if you can't change the how much water you have, of course the priority then in that market becomes how efficiently can you use that material. If you purify it, for example, you don't want to throw half the water out, which goes over to technology right away, because don't forget that when you do reverse osmosis, right, where you shove water through a membrane, right, to leave impurities on the other side, you typically reject half the water. So there's an example. Okay, we understand if we're going to go into the purity of water thing, all of a sudden, if I'm in a place that needs pure water and I'm rejecting half of it, it's a big problem, right? So I got to look at technologies that don't reject half the water. Not only that, by the way, reverse osmosis, when it rejects the water, of course the concentration of impurities in that water is higher. So you still have to do something with that stuff, right? So the already you can see, we had to delve down, beyond this kind of standard information here, and we have to get more detail, and we have to educate the team as to the difference between scarcity of water and purity of water. So I want to mention team a little bit. Your team is never going to be composed of all people just like you, right? It's impossible, right? Not only that, that's not very good, right? If you have a team that's innovating and doing something early, you probably want to have people with different skill sets. Of course, you still have to have them overlap enough so that you can iterate together, right? You probably might have to see right now, sometimes when you're discussing the iterative process, and if people have two different backgrounds, like very, very different backgrounds, then they might not be able to iterate together easily because they don't have the same language, right? So you want a team with different experience, but you want to be overlapping enough that you can understand each other's language, right? So in this case, we had a big gulf because I've got this almost pure finance guy, and then there's different folks, and you have to bridge that gap to teach them the simplest technology stuff so that we can make decisions together and move forward. And to be honest, that's one of the things about TWI is that there was always a lot of management on that in that company. The people were maybe a little bit too far apart, and it was very difficult to maybe iterate efficiently together. We could have probably gone faster if the team was a little bit closer in experience. Nonetheless, we did some fantastic stuff that we'll talk about. So one of the next important things was, okay, if we're going to be in a water scarce area, but we're going to focus on purity, and you'll see this a lot when you guys delve into the market, you have to figure out how people use, like how people are going to use the innovation, how they're actually going to, what is it they do now, and how do we change what they do if our innovation starts to happen, right? And this turned out to be really key data that we collected on the next level down, right? So we said, well, in these regions that we're going to look at, how do people use the water? So this is where it gets into, well, what region are you working in? So one thing that we realized right away was that people act like the water market is the same everywhere, right? And it's not, because every region is a little bit different, right? So I think one of the teams yesterday, we were talking about this, where you have this sort of customization versus, complete platform type of activity, right? And you'd like to go in and design things for particular regions, but if you do customization everywhere, it becomes very expensive, right? So in TWI, we started recognizing, there are these markets that are similar. There's scarce water. They care about purity, but the technical problem of the water in these different places can still be different, right? So we decided to, it's a longer story about how we focused on this, but we ended up looking at the Central Valley of Mexico as one of the places we first start to work, right? And one of the reasons is geographically close, right? Because we felt that, we're probably going to have some, and I'll get into this later, some sort of presence there. So, it's geographically close, it doesn't take too long to get there. And it had this other criterion that we were talking about, where we felt that we could apply a point